Okay, so we just got the stream got a little messed up. So my apologies. Nothing I can control. We're going to go back to Charlie Adelson's trial and hope that the stream is a little bit better. Well, maybe.
Look for things to do. You don't ask me for shit. I look for things to do. You don't ask me for shit. Attorney's fees. He's a guy with considerable resources, and he's not a shrinking violet. He is not afraid to use those resources to his advantage. If some street thug was trying to push him around, do you think he'd lay down and take that without doing one thing about it? This slide is a composite of some of the occasions defendant mentions the option of going to the police. And these quotes are specifically in reference to him saying, if you're threatened, you go to the police. If you're threatened, you go to the police. And he has done that before, but he did not go to the police in this case. He didn't go to the police in 2014, not out of fear, as he would have you believe, but because he did this crime. He believed he had gotten away with this crime. He didn't go in 2015 because he was busy that year having the best year of his life. Financially, got in a serious relationship with a new girl, June Umchinda, cruised the intercoastal in his boat. This dude had solved the problem. Everyone was happy. Wendy and the boys were back in South Florida where they belonged. Mom was happy. He was making money hand over fist. June described the beginning of their relationship. June Umchinda described the beginning of her relationship with this defendant in October of 15 as a fairy tale. He is not sweating anything, folks. And that continued until the time of the bump in this case in April 2016, whereby the defendant became agitated, angry, and anxious. This was before the report concerning him was leaked. At the time of the bump, his behavior changed noticeably. June noticed it, and Ryan Fitzpatrick noticed it as well. He was erratic. Now, why on earth would he be more stressed out after his extortionists were arrested? He seemed perfectly fine to these witnesses when he would have you believe he was in fear for his life. And then he further told you that he was more nervous after the arrest because he feared he'd be falsely arrested. Why? You didn't do anything wrong, you're not going to get arrested. Now, yeah, after the report gets leaked, okay, but why are you so nervous before that? Or were you a hot mess because you knew that we were getting closer? Here's Catherine Magdanoff and the defendant discussing if the undercover could be someone who's trying to be an informant. An informant for what, if not the death of Dan Markel? He's not going to be an informant on the defendant getting extorted, a crime he has not reported. Here they're talking about whether the undercover is getting his information from the inside or the outside. The inside meaning someone within the murder conspiracy, someone on that board, or the outside, somebody that one of those people told. Magbanua says it can only be one of two, apparently. If somebody's that desperate, not from the inside, because there's too much from the inside that the person knows from the outside, so they won't risk it. That's why I know for a fact it's not from the inside. And then Adelson says, it's somebody not from the first layer, but probably the second layer. Yeah, and they just made a big mistake, she says. As the wire goes on and the defendant proceeds to continue to analyze the additional bump efforts that law enforcement makes, that text message, the letter, the call to the Adelson Institute, he becomes increasingly confident that this would-be extortionist is an undercover agent. And then after listening to Donna's call to the undercover, he is completely sure of that. And you have never seen anybody so elated to be under investigation by the FBI for first-degree murder. Consider this in light of defendant's assertions that he was acting strangely after the bump because he was worried about being falsely arrested. To the contrary, he doesn't seem worried at all. He seems thrilled. I think he says it's fantastic in one of these calls. I want to turn briefly to your jury instructions. The defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, and first-degree murder. Why all three? Because the defendant didn't just ask Catherine Magbanua to do this and promise her money. He didn't just set a plan of action in place toward doing it. It got done. It got done. And that's what makes it a murder. That's the difference between just conspiring. You didn't just conspire. It got done. This is the difference between just soliciting or just conspiring and being a principal to first-degree murder. To prove the crime of first-degree murder, I must prove to you that this was premeditated. Premeditation is defined as killing after consciously intending to do so. This murder, consciously deciding to do so. All right, so this murder was in the works for over a year. It began with the failed relocation efforts. When defendant first looked into hiring a hitman, it took root when he enlisted Catherine Magbanua, and she thereby brought in Garcia and Rivera to do the killing. The planning that went into the killing was extensive, spanning over a year, and it included the solicitation of Magbanua to find someone to do the murder, the preparation of that letter and that envelope that were placed in Catherine Magbanua's diaper bag, free of DNA or prints containing the directions for a murder that was delivered to the hired gun, Secreto Garcia. 3, the payments that were made in advance for renting the vehicles in the hotel room, the expenses associated with those trips. That was part of the planning. 4, the scouting and stalking of Professor Markel that we learned went on in both trips. And 5, the pressure that defendant applied to Catherine Magbanua after that first attempt failed. Get it done, get it done, get it done. 6, of course, is the payment itself. He paid for it. All the planning, all the meetings, all the precautions were coming to fruition when that hired gun fired those 2 shots that devastated so many lives on July 18th, 2014. When you think about how this case was proven, we started at a single point, the crime scene, and we went in 2 totally different directions. We chased the Prius and we chased the motive, the bad blood with the in-laws. And the investigation could have stalled if either of these leads had resulted in a dead end. But all the little breadcrumbs led to the same place. The Prius led to Garcia and Rivera, which led to Magbanua. Bad blood and the divorce led to the Adelson family. The wire confirmed the defendant's specific involvement, not just some Adelson, that Adelson. Then Rivera and eventually Magbanua confirmed his involvement as well. I want to spend a moment talking about the principal instruction. We talked about this in jury selection. The defendant didn't pull the trigger, but that doesn't mean he isn't just as responsible as the person who did. Without every player in this conspiracy, the murder doesn't get done. In your jury instructions, it says there are 2 ways to prove defendant's guilt under the law of principles. If he intended that the murder be done and he did some act, preparing the paper, procuring Magdanoa, or said some word, get it done, get it done, get it done, that caused or helped another to commit the crime, then he is guilty of first-degree murder. Or, 2 ways you can find it. Or, if he intended the murder to be done, and he made or promised payment in exchange for the murder, and the crime was committed by another person, he's guilty of first-degree murder. My burden today is to prove to you this case beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury instructions tell you that a reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. So when you're stuck back there deliberating, ask yourself, what is reasonable? When you're weighing a piece of evidence and deciding, like, is this a doubt or not? Is it reasonable? Does it fit with the other evidence in the case? If you find yourself saying, what if, or a fellow juror is saying, what if, without evidence to support whatever it is that comes after the what if, that's speculation. Remind your fellow jurors to get back on track. And that cannot be a reasonable doubt if it's speculation. My burden is to prove the elements of the listed offenses. Nothing more. If you have a question that I have failed to prove the answer to, but it's not one of these elements of the crime that the judge has given you, that is not a reasonable doubt. I'm concerned that you'll get back there and think, well, he didn't pull the trigger, so let's just do conspiracy and solicitation. You guys have worked too hard to render a compromised verdict at this point. I trust that each of you will follow the law and your oath to render a wise and legal verdict in this case. This defendant is guilty of first-degree murder under the principal theory, if ever anyone has been. So the efforts to distract you from this case and what it's really about, including these clear links in this conspiracy and all the evidence that establishes them, the text, the calls, the records, the testimony of Rivera, the testimony of Magdanoa, all those things together. The wiretap, the phone calls, the iCloud messages, and the absence of any other reasonable explanation should all lead you to one conclusion. This is the puzzle. This is the puzzle. The image is clear. When I confronted Rivera with the defense theory that he and Garcia acted alone to kill Markel and then extorted money out of the dentist through Magdanoa, he found it laughable. I wrote down his quote, that's a good one. It came out in this trial that in Garcia's trial, Rivera was portrayed as the sole killer, the bad guy. He conspired directly with Charlie Adelson, according to Garcia, to commit the murder through WhatsApp or some kind of way. Garcia's lawyers said this was all done without the knowledge and participation of Garcia. Then we learned in Magdanoa's trial, Garcia supposedly conspired directly.
Objection, Your Honor. Roach.
Okay, so it's been a pretty good cross by Georgia, but not so far. She hasn't really brought it all home in a passionate, she doesn't have to be passionate, but I'd like to see some passion. She started out strong in the beginning. She got caught in the weeds, talking about the divorce, going through Wendy and Dan's divorce and how awful it was. And then she, I think, brought people back, going through the crime. But if I were Georgia, I would end on Charlie Adelson's quote. It's something like, who are they going to believe? This Latin king and these sort of low people, or me, the dentist. Nobody's going to believe a dentist did this. Something like that he was caught on the wire saying. I would end with that quote. Challenge the jury to prove him wrong. After you've gone through, and I think, she's going through how this meets the criteria of first-degree murder. She does not want them to be confused.
You're to rely on your memories of what took place during the testimony and evidence. You may continue with your argument.
Now, here we are in the trial of Charlie Adelson, and the truth has been revealed. Once again, the state got this almost right. That's what you heard in the opening from Mr. Rashbaum. We understandably thought that his client, Mr. Adelson, was the hirer of this murder, but there's a twist. Nothing is as it appears to be. The defendant is really the second victim in all of this. Per his theory, the killers drove to Miami twice to kill someone they'd never met and had no motive to kill, in hopes that Charlie Adelson would, 1, not report them for murder, and 2, would instead agree to give them large amounts of cash at that time and on a payment plan over the next, years. Other than failing the smell test, there are a few specific problems with the defense theory. 1, how would the killers have known where to go to kill Markel? How would they know who to kill? How could the killers have known that Dan Markel was scheduled to leave town the day after the murder? 3, possibly the biggest problem, the theory itself makes no sense. Were they just hoping that this would work? We're going to go all the way up there and kill somebody, and maybe they'll give us some money. They were going to confess to doing the murder to Charlie Adelson in order to try to get money. Why not just put a gun to his head and take his money? Why not just rob and or extort him with the threat of death by Latin King? That would save you the trip and the murder rap. Their jigsaw puzzle theory is just a pile of pieces that don't fit together. Each explanation is carefully designed to explain one piece of evidence. But how many different explanations can you string together before it's no longer reasonable? How many coincidences can there be before it's no longer a coincidence? This defendant is not a victim. He's a criminal. He's wealthy, he's smart, and he's successful. But he's a wealthy, smart, successful murderer. My work is almost done here, and yours is just beginning. I trust that each of you will do your best to render a wise and legal verdict in this case. A verdict that speaks the truth. A just verdict. And that is a verdict of guilty as charged. Thank you.
Almost a little bit defeated there, Georgia.
Yes, Your Honor. Maybe you just have a couple moments to set up.
Okay. You may set up.
So Daniel Rashbaum, this is Charlie Adelson's defense attorney, is a totally
While we're
different.
setting up, the bailiff will escort you back into the jury room.
Okay, a totally different type of lawyer, very bombastic, very theatrical, very emotional. And he has a terrible case. Now, of course, he said it's easy defending. He said this to, I believe, a journalist, that it's easy to defend Charlie because he's an innocent man. LOL on that. But I thought it was a good closing argument by Georgia Kappelman, but not as good a closing argument as she is good at being a lawyer. I don't think She really needed to put in some zingers, keep them awake. But there's a lot of very good facts on her side. Every witness besides Charlie Adelson supports her theory. A lot of strong evidence in emails, cell phone tower evidence, so many different types of evidence in this case. You got to have a really wacky pro-defense juror. Now, I've heard there is a juror like this who's been nodding his head along with the defense and shaking his head no and making faces, that like disbelief type faces at Georgia Kappelman, the assistant state's attorney in this case. I've also heard that he's an alternate juror. If he's on the jury and he is unmovable, then it's a hung jury. But I do not see an acquittal with all the strong evidence in this case, but you never know. It's a fool's game predicting a jury. But I was hoping Georgia Kappelman would make some stronger points. Mentor Lawyer on his channel, Deep Dive Crime, went over her cross. Thought it was very interesting. And he said, she put in a lot of good points. His point was that she should have read the Adelson's public statement about Dan's death, where they said the fact that they were involved is all fanciful fiction. And it would have been good on the cross to bring up to Charlie and have him explain what that meant. But he's such a proficient liar. He can come up with stuff on the fly, but I would have liked to seen him explain it. When he explained how he whispered in his father's ear the one time he's talking about his extortion, quote unquote, it's off camera, off being recorded. That was unbelievable. Also thought it was very bad on cross-examination when Charlie was showing off and saying, oh, you want to know where I said it? I said it in April 20th recording. So he didn't know he was being recorded, but now he's familiar with every line he said in those undercover recordings after the bump. So they put in an undercover police officer, had him go up to Donna and ask for $5,000 for his homie in jail, his relative in jail, to take care of him, just like the way that Adelson family took care of Katie, Luis Rivera, and Sigfredo Garcia. So Garcia and Rivera were the shooters. Katie was the middle woman, also dating Charlie Adelson. So we're going to see if this is enough. I fear a hung jury at this point. I really was hoping for a little bit stronger cross. Although I thought it was a really good point at the end when she said, he's a rich criminal. He's a rich killer. I thought that was great. And point out that this is all he has, is this tailored to the evidence story. And when things happen in your own life, very seldom is your story the only way you can prove it. And his proof is like these loving text messages between him and his extortionist. It's a little crazy. So Die Freiter Watcher says, I've heard some jurors who comment that lawyers who put on a grand show at closing turns them off. Well, they're then get ready to be turned off by Rashbaum. That is his style. He's from the Leslie Abramson, I don't know, Johnny Cochran style of lawyers, theatrical. They felt they were trying to play on your emotions, not the facts, so drama could backfire on them. Right. It could work. I thought it was a very good close. I just hope that the jury doesn't get caught, because what Charlie Adelson and his lawyer did was tailor their story to every part of the evidence. So what I'm hoping doesn't happen is they get back there and they start saying, well, this could be true and this could be true and this could be true. Because we're going to put all these little bits of his story to the tailored evidence. I would have liked to have seen her bring home the point that this is just his story. All he has is a story. That's it. So it's going to be, I like Rashbaum. I think he's a good lawyer. I can see how he could turn people off. Charlie Adelson is not a likable client. He's arrogant. He's cocky. He doesn't, for all his claims of innocence, he certainly doesn't come off as an innocent man. Today is the first time we've seen him look really angry. And I was commenting in the comment section, I don't know if he got notes to look angry so he can be upset by his false accusation, false indictment, mad that he's on trial, as anyone who is innocent would be. But this must be costing him, a small fortune in lawyers. And of course, he denies paying the middle woman, Katie McBanawa's lawyers. She had 3 lawyers and she had 2 trials. But her family is not wealthy. And she said, oh, my family went into debt with those lawyers. I mean, this is extreme kind of debt that you go into for these 2 trials. They wanted a private lawyer that badly. They couldn't use a public attorney, that they were willing to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And who was giving them these loans? Or were they mortgaging their house? Did they have a house? I mean, she really comes from lower class family. I don't know how they could afford that. The thought is that the Adelsons paid for her defense. And that's why, even with 2 or 3 pro offers, meaning she's agreeing to cooperate so that maybe she'll get a sentence reduction, she's doing life in prison, which does seem like an extreme sentence for her involvement in this. But when you're involved in a murder, you're going to get a long sentence. But there are murderers who actually pulled the trigger doing lesser time. So, but she didn't really come through in the way that we had hoped. People who watched this case in implicating the Adelsons totally and thoroughly in a way that we could really indict Wendy and maybe Donna. Although I think someone in the comment section was mentioning that many people feel that Donna and Wendy are next to get indicted. And this has been going. So first they indicted the shooters, then Katie, then Charlie. So this is, I think we're 7 or 8. This happened in 2014, this murder. So yeah, we're looking at 11 years out. Yeah, more than a decade. So get a cup of tea, get some snacks, and I'll meet you back here for the closing argument of the defense.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Gotcha. Everyone can be seated.
You gotta stop.
So the defense has their closing, and then, of course, the state, because they have the burden of proof, gets the rebuttal.
Good morning.
You saw Charlie Adelson hand his lawyer a big Post-it note during Georgia's closing, and you saw his lawyer go through his closing, looks quite long, and stick the Post-it note on top of one page of his, what I thought was his closing. Obviously, I can't know what's in his binder. So be interesting to see or know what that point was. See if we can pick out a Charlie Adelson point. Just waiting for the jury to get in. Boy, this is long. This is why people hate trials, the slow pace of it. I love it. I'm a trial junkie, but I can see why people get frustrated. It is very, very slow going. But it's like being told a story. Very complicated story that takes days and days. Highly psychological. And if you can just sort of get into the pace of it, slower pace, I think they're fascinating. Do you guys have favorite trials? My favorite trial, I don't know. My first trial was the Menendez trial. Wow, this is a long break, no? Oh, finally.
Everyone can be seated. Mr. Rauschbaum, you may give the defense's closing.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel. Good morning. As we discussed in jury selection, Charles Adelson is presumed to be innocent. To overcome that presumption of innocence, the state has the heavy burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Charlie committed the crime that they say he committed. We did not have to present any evidence whatsoever. That's how our system works. We did not need to prove his innocence. As you go through the trial, you were told that you needed to evaluate the evidence through a lens of innocence, a presumption of innocence. Now, I think we did prove his innocence in this trial, but that isn't the standard. That's not what you go back there and deliberate. What you see in this trial is a mountain of reasonable doubt that arises from the evidence itself, from the conflict in the evidence, and from the lack of evidence. The state's first question to Mr. Adelson when he was on the stand was something called Occam's razor. Their first question was referring to their belief that the simple answer is the preferred answer. You might recall them asking that question, the very first question they asked Ms. Charlie. Occam's razor, that proposition that the simple answer is the preferred answer, is the exact opposite of what our criminal justice system is about. See, Occam's razor is a guess. We don't guess in this country. We don't assume people to be guilty. We presume them to be innocent. And sometimes the simple answer is the wrong answer. Sometimes things aren't so simple. And that's what we have in this case. I talked to you in opening about puzzle pieces. I talked to you in opening about how puzzle pieces wouldn't fit. And that's exactly what you saw repeatedly in this case. Just one of those puzzle pieces is enough for reasonable doubt. But here we have a mountain of them. And let's talk about them briefly. Government Exhibit 59. This is their conspiracy chart. The first puzzle piece that doesn't fit is motive. See, Charlie Adelson didn't have a motive to upend his life. Charlie Adelson had a good life. His business was booming. He was supportive of his sister, but he didn't wake up in the morning thinking about Professor Markel. He didn't go to bed at night thinking about the problems his sister was having. He was living his life. Now, was it a bitter divorce? Absolutely. But through all of those crazy emails, are there any examples of any violence? None. Those emails, we spent about 10 minutes hearing about them this morning. Not Charlie's ideas. By the way, those emails weren't even done. You heard from Wendy Adelson. She never offered any of those things to Professor Markel. She never threatened him with any of those things. Crazy ideas? Yes. An upset mother? Yes. Pushing each other's buttons? Yes. But ladies and gentlemen, even the $1 million offer you heard, lawyers were consulted to make sure it was legal. A far cry from a murder. Their relocation motive. Relocation was denied a year before the murder. And by the way, Wendy Adelson and her 2 boys moving to South Florida would have no impact on Charlie Adelson. Would he be happy that they were there? Sure. Would it change his life? No. Now, you may wonder, why did we spend so much time on cross proving Wendy Adelson's innocence? The reason being is because on their exhibit, take a look who is in their conspiracy. They circled her for you in their opening cross. See, they were guessing about Wendy just like they're guessing about Charlie. What the evidence showed is that Wendy wanted to leave South Florida. But when it was denied in the summer of 2013, she made a life here in Tallahassee. What the evidence showed, and remember, I tried to get an email after email after email, and they fought me on it. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what they were afraid for you to see. You saw that she made appointments. In the fall and winter. You saw that she got a new divorce lawyer. You saw that she was making play dates. And significantly, you saw that the entire family was making plans to come up here and see her celebrated for her book at FSU with incoming students. Why is that significant? Because their theory, their simple theory, is that she was part of a murder. It's a puzzle piece that does not fit. And we're going to talk about her trip down Trescott on the 18th, because that's a puzzle piece that they keep on trying to pound and doesn't fit, but we'll do that a little later. The next puzzle piece that doesn't fit. Who had the kids? See, one thing that the state and the defense can agree on is that the Adelsons love these two boys. But they would have you believe that they hired hitmen twice. And both times, who had custody of the kids? They would take a risk that these boys would be injured, killed. Does that make any sense? The June attempt. Remember, Wendy and Danny shared the kids 50-50. The June attempt, we learned from their witness, Luis Rivera, Danny had custody of the kids. And we learned that he wouldn't do the murder because the kids were there. The July attempt, they show you a text message about Professor Markell being in town. And they show you a text message where Wendy's asking for the boys on the 16th. The murder's done on the 18th. Who has custody of the kids? Professor Markell. It doesn't make sense. There is no chance if these people were behind the murder, they would take any risk that those boys would be in the crosshairs. Use your common sense. It's a puzzle piece that they cannot explain. And you know what else doesn't make sense? Is their alibi argument. So they make a big argument about this Best Buy repairman coming that morning, how it was set up for an alibi. The argument, by the way, makes absolutely no sense, because then they argue that Wendy purposefully went down the street of where she was supposed to get an alibi from. But let me ask you this question. Again, use your common sense. If the Adelsons and Charlie wanted to set up an alibi for not only Wendy, but themselves, why not do the murder on July 5th when each and every one of them is at a birthday party for their father in South Florida? Wouldn't that have been a better alibi? They didn't do that because they're not behind the murder. They didn't know it was going to happen. They have nothing to do with it. It's a puzzle piece that doesn't make sense. It's reasonable doubt. Sigfredo threatened Charlie. Now, the state has them as co-conspirators. The testimony is clear. Sigfredo Garcia hated Charlie Adelson. The testimony is clear from their own witnesses that Sigfredo Garcia wanted to kill Charlie Adelson. In fact, you hear that on March 11th, 2014, just 8.5 weeks before the first attempt, you hear that from Luis Rivera, that Sigfredo was stalking Charlie and he wanted to run him over with his car. He wanted to kill him. He's going to do that 8 weeks before he does a murder for him? Makes no sense. But it gets worse. You heard testimony in this courtroom from repeated witnesses, both law enforcement and otherwise, that on July 1st, just 17 days before the murder, Sigfredo Garcia tried to run Charlie off the road, threatened him, left a threatening voicemail that he was going to kill him, left it with his dad, but thought he was leaving it for Charlie. It's just 17 days before the state wants you to believe he went and did a hit for him. It doesn't make any sense. It's a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. Now, they'll come up here in rebuttal, and they'll probably say something like, Sigfredo didn't know what he was doing, Katie was siloing him of information. Ask yourselves if that makes any sense. Ask yourself if after the first attempt, he doesn't know exactly who he's killing. It's reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. It's a puzzle piece that they cannot explain. The hitman joke. We learned in this trial that Charlie repeatedly made this off-color joke. And let me say something aside. You don't have to like Charlie Adelson. There are plenty of reasons not to like him. That doesn't make him a murderer. Now, this hitman joke, we learned that Charlie made it with people he hardly knew. That he made it repeatedly. We learned from their own witness that at a March 11th dinner, this is Jeff Lacoste, when he first met Charlie, Charlie made the joke. Ask yourselves, does it make any sense for a guy who is about to do a hit, about to murder someone, to go around town and advertise it? Doesn't fit. Reasonable doubt. Ask yourselves, does it make more sense for Catherine Magbanua, a professional liar and con artist, to hear the joke to hear the $1 million offer and start to get ideas. They want to call it coincidences. It's not a coincidence. Criminals do not advertise what they are about to do. That makes no sense. Reasonable doubt. Puzzle pieces that don't fit. Payment evidence. Ms. Kappelman mocked in her cross of Charlie that this was a murder by layaway, meaning that doesn't make any sense. We agree with her. It doesn't make any sense. Murders for hire are not done by layaway. But you know what is done by layaway? Extortions. See, we learned in this trial that Catherine Magbanua got paid every month. She denied it. Their own witnesses proved it. We learned that she got paid $3,000 a month, $2,000 in cash and $1,000 in checks from the Adelson Institute. By the way, if Charlie's part of a murder, they're telling you how smart he is. Does it make any sense that he would create a paper trail of checks from his business to pay for the murder? It makes no sense. But aside from that, you heard from Special Agent Sanford. He has done around a dozen murder for hires. Never a payment over time. He's seen extortions like that, but never someone getting paid over time. The money drop was the next day. You heard about that. Ask yourself, if this was a murder for hire, why was payment not made before? See, the state gave you examples of days before the first attempt and days before the murder, where Charlie Adelson was with Catherine Magbanua. If it's a murder for hire, why didn't he pay her before? You heard on the night of the murder and the night of the extortion, she had to go run around town to find a babysitter for her kids. If it was planned, if Charlie was behind it, why would she not have it planned out that way? Why would he have not paid her before? See, because he had no idea it was going to happen. That's the only thing that makes sense. By the way, why would she need a babysitter at all if it was a murder for hire? If it's a murder for hire, how much time does it take to go pick up money? Go to the house, get the bag of money, and leave. See, the thing is, she didn't know how much time it was going to take. And you know why she didn't know how much time it was going to take? Because she didn't know how he was going to react. It wasn't just a pickup of the money on July 18th. It was a setup of an extortion. Now, we're going to get more into the extortion, but it's amazing to me that the state still doesn't understand what happened. And I wonder if they don't understand or they're trying to confuse you. So let me make this crystal clear now, and we'll get back to it later. On the night of the 18th, Charlie Adelson had no idea about anything about the Latin Kings. He had no knowledge of the Latin Kings. He doesn't find out anything about the Latin Kings until he's in the car with Catherine Magbanua moments before he goes into Dolce Vita. On the night of the 18th, what he's told is that Catherine Magbanua said she spoke too much and that a friend of hers had done this. Nothing about any Latin Kings. The payment structure makes no sense. The whole purpose of a murder for hire is to hire someone who you are not associated with, who you are not tied to. But yet, they would have you believe that Charlie would give them checks, would continue to text message with them, would continue to give them gifts because he was tied to a murder for hire. It shows just the opposite. It shows it's an extortion. Reasonable doubt. Katie's lies. Let me first start by apologizing. If any of you were offended by the tone of my voice during my cross of Catherine Magbanua. See, the thing is, I think you all know me pretty well by now. I'm passionate. And I believe in the system. And the one thing I hate is when someone comes in this courtroom and lies. I hate even more when a murderer comes in this courtroom and lies. What we know is that the state called Catherine Magbanua. Talk about desperation in trying to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They called a woman who lied under oath in her first trial. They called a woman who lied under oath in her second trial. They called a woman who tried to get Sigfredo Garcia to lie for her in her second trial. But worse, they called a woman who just a year ago lied during her proffers. She denied it. And by the way, they didn't question her on it. But you heard from their own witnesses, including Special Agent Sanford, that he walked out of the room. And he walked out of the room not the first 10 minutes. He walked out of the room over 3 hours after she started speaking. Because as he put it, what she was saying made no sense. And they're going to have you base this man's freedom on her words? And why did she lie? Because it's her only way out. But her lying didn't stop there. She lied to you. We caught her in lies. She said she didn't get paid overtime. We know she got paid overtime. She said she didn't know when the murder happened, when the plan changed to a murder, and that the plan was to murder Professor Markel. You've heard the wires. We see her lying to her co-conspirator, according to them, Charlie Adelson, on the wires themselves. We see her saying repeatedly to him that she has called the number hundreds of times, that it's a non-working number, that the number just rings, that they left a voicemail. All of those are lies. By the way, you know who she doesn't lie to? Sigfredo Garcia. You know who else she lied to? Luis Rivera. We heard that. She lied to him about the purpose of the trip. She lied to him about the lady being on the street. She told Luis that Wendy was on the street the day before the murder with her kids. Now, you may remember the judge read a stipulation in, which both sides agree on, that shows that Wendy could not be on the street with the kids. Luis Rivera didn't lie. She lied to him. She lied to him about the amount of money they got. She told him it was $100,000 when it was $138,000. And she never told him that she was getting paid every month. Remember, Rivera wanted to do a robbery. Ms. Kappelman comes up here in her closing, and she says, why didn't they just do a robbery? Wouldn't that have been easier? Remember, Rivera brought up that very point. And what is he told by Sigfredo Garcia? It can't be a robbery. Katie says we have to do it this way. Ask yourself why. The bottom line is, Charlie Adelson was conned. On the night of the 18th, he was scared. He didn't think she was part of it. He thought she was protecting him. That's why he thought the money didn't go up every month. That's why he thought he wasn't getting visited by any bad guys. And that made him closer to her over time. Reasonable doubt, a puzzle piece doesn't fit. Immunity. She was offered a get out of jail free card, and she didn't take it. She was offered it before her first trial. Now, she had an explanation for that. I didn't want to turn on my husband. But what about after he was convicted and his appeals were over? Remember, her first trial was in 19. Her second trial was in 2022. See, she couldn't take the immunity offer because when you take the immunity offer, you have to tell the truth. And if you're caught telling a lie, you not only lose immunity, but you've now confessed. You now have no defense. She knew she extorted Charlie. She knew she tricked him. She knew he wasn't part of the murder, and that's why she never took the immunity deal. Reasonable doubt. Puzzle pieces that no matter how hard you try to hammer them in, don't fit. And let me ask you a question. Ask yourself why, when the state called her as a witness, they didn't ask her one question about the wires. Go back and look at your notes. Not one question about what was said and meant at Dolce Vita. Not one question of what they talked about in the car before Dolce Vita. And then Charlie Adelson takes the stand. And they have an opportunity to rebut him They have an opportunity to call her back to the stand and say, you're not going to believe this crazy, unreasonable story that Charlie just wove. They don't call her back to the stand. They don't ask her any of those questions because they don't trust her. Because they know that she can't answer those questions. Because the truth is, they have doubt. You heard it. They have doubt. That's why it took them 6 years after her arrest to even charge Charlie Adelson. Ask yourselves, why were they so afraid to ask her any of those questions? Security cameras. Now, let me be clear. In closing, Ms. Kappelman said that no one testified that Charlie's demeanor changed in 2014. No one was asked about that. He doesn't meet June Nchinda until 2015. But what we do know is his behavior did change. What we know from evidence in the record is that he started sleeping with a gun. What we know from evidence in the record is that he invested in camera equipment for his house and for the office. Now, the state comes up here and they say, well, there's this email or text message from months earlier where he's talking about putting in camera equipment. True. Guess what he didn't do months earlier? He didn't put in camera equipment. But guess what he does just weeks after he's extorted? Just weeks after Professor Markel is brutally murdered in broad daylight in his driveway, he puts in camera equipment. If he's a co-conspirator, who's he afraid of? According to them, he's the guy behind it. The camera equipment is to protect himself against himself? Reasonable doubt. The wires support what happened on the night of the 18th. They support that he was extorted. Now, I'll first talk about State's Exhibit 130. You'll remember this when I talk about it. It's 21 months after the murder and the extortion. It's before the bump. It's one of these calls about Dave. And it's very interesting and scary what happened in this trial on this call. State plays 18 minutes of the call, and then they cut it off. They ask the witness how important the call is because it's before the bump. Meaning there's no reason whatsoever that anyone is thinking that they're being listened to. 21 months after the murder, 21 months after the extortion. And at 20 minutes and 40 seconds in the call, 2 minutes after they cut it off, you hear what Charlie Adelson thought about Professor Markel. You hear him describe what happened to him as a tragedy. His own words, in real time. You hear him say to his mom that Professor Markel is not replaceable. They didn't want you to hear that. I want to go back briefly to the security cameras. Ms. Kappelman comes in here today and she talks about the times that Charlie went to the police. And she brings up examples of filing a lawsuit. She brings up an example of a dispute with a girlfriend. Those are very different than being told you have 48 hours to pay or you and your family are going to get killed. Especially taken in the context that just 9 hours earlier, Professor Markel was shot in broad daylight, executed. Reasonable doubt, a puzzle piece that just doesn't fit. Let's talk more about these wires. State's Exhibit 108, that's all the wires together. There's subparts of it. And I want to draw your attention to A, B, and C. These are the first 3 calls with Donna Adelson after the bump. What you see on these calls is that initially, for at least the first call and a half, Charlie Adelson has no idea whatsoever what she's talking about. None. Now ask yourself, if you did a murder with someone, wouldn't that be the first thing on your mind? He has no clue what she is saying. He's talking about Yelp. He's talking about the IRS. He's talking about being sued. He has no clue. She says it's about the 2 of us. We've already done this. We beat a horse to death on this. It's about the 2 of us. You were extorted, and now I'm being extorted. It doesn't even make sense under their theory of murder. By the way, on those first calls, she wants to meet with them when Wendy and Harvey are not around. I'm confused. I thought they're co-conspirators, according to the state. A puzzle piece that makes no sense. By the way, he starts to figure out what it is when she brings up blackmail. And when she brings up, and you can listen to it, you'll see the hesitation in his voice that he needs to bring cash when they meet the next day for lunch. He starts to figure it out. And what does he immediately shift his attention to? Don't take my word for it. You can listen to the wires. Was the guy white or Hispanic? Was the guy wearing a disguise? Was the guy threatening? Did he give you 48 hours? He's trying to figure out if it's the same people. Now, they talk about why would he call Katie? His mom doesn't say anything about Katie, and he has other ex-girlfriends. Well, he has only one ex-girlfriend that on July 18th came to him and said, you have to pay money. I'm not part of this. Because if you don't pay money, they're going to kill you. And see, they ignore D 1392, part of the same exhibit. He slips. 3 minutes and 34 seconds into this recording, Charlie slips. See, he's got to be careful on these calls when he's talking to Katie, because he doesn't want her to think that he's setting her up and setting up her friend, whoever that might be. He doesn't know at this point. He has a guess, but he doesn't know. And the reason why he has to do that is because he needs her help. She's the one who is most equipped to help him figure out, is this a bad guy? Because if it's a bad guy, he's worried they're going to get killed. She says his first instinct isn't to pay. We're going to get to that. His absolute first instinct in Dolce Vita is to pay. You can listen to it. So he has to be careful in how he talks to her, but 3 minutes and 34 seconds into D1392, he says the following. I mean, you didn't do anything with my mom. And she responds, what would I do with your mom? And he says, just checking. What could that possibly mean if he's not referring to the extortion? How could that possibly be talking about a murder for hire? It cannot be. 3 minutes and 34 seconds in, give or take, D1392. Don't take my word for it. Listen to it. On the wires, Charlie Adelson's way of calming down his mom, and what he is hoping for is that it is the police. How does that make any sense if he did a murder? He did a murder, but he's hoping that the police are onto him? It makes no sense. See, he's hoping it's the police because he didn't do a murder. And if it's the police, no one's going to get killed. They went through Dolce Vita with you, and I'll probably go through it a little bit more with you later. But let me say this. Listen to it for yourselves. Think about the parts that they left out in their closing. How about the 9 times that he says something to the effect of, we have nothing to hide. We didn't do anything. How about the 36 times he says that on the wires? How about when he says in Dolce Vita, these people only know part of the story, or they think they know part of the story? What could he possibly be talking about if he did a murder for hire? What he's saying is, they think we did a murder for hire. They don't understand I was extorted. They think they know the whole story, but they only know part of the story. And that's why I hope it's the police. In Matsuri, he says twice, the funny thing is. Listen to it in the context. What's funny is they don't realize that the sting they put together is close to the truth. PP 2325, 7 minutes in. They opened on it. But they didn't want to play it for you. They skipped over it. It's in evidence. You can hear it. There's talk about it being someone not from the first layer, but probably the second layer. Talking about extortion. The first layer is when he was extorted on the evening of July 18th. and his payments for the 21 months. The second layer is the bump. He's trying to figure out, is it the police? Is it a copycat? Or is it the same guys? On the wires, who are the only people that call and speak with the undercover? They call from their cell phones. They don't make a big deal about star 67. They call from their cell phones. They don't get burner phones. The only two people that speak with the undercover, Charlie Adelson, Donna Adelson. Ask yourself why. Reasonable doubt, a puzzle piece doesn't fit. Look at the text messages. Now, I fought to get in these text messages. Ask yourself why I had to fight so hard.
Judge, I'm going to object to Connor's rulings and
Sustain.
legal objections.
Please move on.
Look at the text messages that are in evidence. Nothing out of the ordinary. Everything explained. He didn't hide or flee. Not like Catherine McBanoa, another lie she told you all. She said she didn't know it was the police outside. She didn't hide. You heard she hid. You heard she got a burner phone. I-1393, 1 minute and 47 seconds in. A call between Catherine McBanoa and Sigfredo Garcia. 1 minute and 47 seconds in, Katie tells Sigfredo that she's worried, in essence, that Charlie's parents, Donna and Harvey, are going to go to the police. If they're co-conspirators in a murder for hire, why would she be worried that they're going to go to the police? It doesn't make any sense. Simply put, these puzzle pieces and others do not fit the state's theory. Why? Because while they want to make this a simple explanation, while they use words in closing 13 times could, 6 times maybe, 2 times maybe not, 3 times suspicious, 6 times coincidence, that is not beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not what we do in this courtroom. We presume innocence. We don't guess. We don't ignore things that don't fit into the theory. Now, I want to turn to the testimony at trial, and I will try not to be repetitive. The first group of witnesses, we asked very few questions. We don't disagree that the murder of Professor Markell was horrific. They showed you those pictures today. I can't look at them. These people that killed him were animals. He agreed that the police work was phenomenal. That's why they caught the 3 people who did this. But you also remember, check your notes, that none of those original witnesses said a word about Charlie Adelson. Now, the first witness of substance was Agent Sanford. He came twice, so we're going to deal with him each time. The first time he came on the stand, let me say this. He's an honest and truthful guy. He's exactly what you want from a witness. Compare him to Catherine McBanoa. compare him to Ryan Fitzpatrick. We'll get to that. They put in emails through him, and they showed that there was distress in the family, that there was anger over the relocation issue and divorce. They also showed that the relocation issue was denied in 2013, the summer of 2013, a year before the murder. We saw that there were very few emails from Charlie Adelson, although he was aware of some of the crazy emails. And he would say things like, "Good idea." We learned about the $1 million offer and how Charlie was going to pay a third of the $1 million with the hopes of getting paid back. And we learned through Agent Sanford that there were emails that showed that this $1 million offer, the Adelsons consulted a lawyer on it to make sure they were doing things legal. We learned that in his experience, murders for hire aren't paid this way. We've already talked about that. And we learned that there is ongoing discussions about where the kids were going to go to school in the fall of 2014. Ask yourselves, why do you need those discussions if you know you're about to kill a guy and relocate? And then we heard from Wendy Adelson. And again, we spent a lot of time crossing Wendy Adelson because we wanted to show you that their theory on her was absolutely wrong. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier, in addition to the plane tickets and the hiring of a divorce lawyer and the scheduled meetings and the custody arrangements in August, you see in Defense Exhibit 6 that she's trying to buy a house. Now, they talk about a house on Halloween Halloween of 2013 that Charlie convinced her not to get. What about when she's looking for a house just a month or so before the murder? No evidence that anyone's trying to stop her then. She testified that she was not worried about disbarment. By the way, we called her lawyer to the stand to buttress her testimony because the same motion was made against her. And she testified she wasn't worried about disbarment either. She testified that she never made the $1 million offer or the Christianity email threats. We showed through emails and on the wires to support her testimony that after the murder, she was scared and sick. You don't have to take Charlie's word for it, and you don't have to take my word for it. It's on the wires. On the wires themselves, it talks about how Wendy is finally getting over this. We showed through stipulation that there's no way she and the kids could have been on the road the day of the 17th. And we showed that through her that Professor Markel posted in a lot of places about his travel. Now, we have no idea how Catherine Magbanua and Sigfredo Garcia knew where Danny lived and knew when he was going to be out of town. We don't know because it has nothing to do with us. But we showed you possibilities of where the information could have been found. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of reasonable doubt. As opposed to some crazy explanation, and we'll get to it, that just 3 weeks after dating, he put some letter in her bag that she doesn't know what the letter is about and what it says, but it must have been that. Does that make any sense? And we showed that on the day of the murder, Wendy Adelson voluntarily was interviewed for hours without a lawyer. She gave her phone. She let them search her car. She let them search her computer. And she named everyone who could have done this. Everyone that came to mind, the first person she named was herself. And yes, she mentioned the hitman joke. And then she said, but he wouldn't do it. By the way, talk about a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. His co-conspirator goes to an interview with law enforcement on the day of the murder and tells law enforcement about the hitman joke. Does that make any sense? It does if they're not co-conspirators. It does if they had nothing to do with the murder. Reasonable doubt. She talked about her problems in the relationship with Jeff Lacoste, how he was stalking her and jealous. She was adamant that Charlie never actually looked into hiring a hitman, that was a lie. And was adamant that the dinner they had weeks later, no one called it a celebration dinner. Her testimony, a state witness, did just the opposite of proving their case. It gave more reasonable doubt, and I would submit proved innocence. The next witness was Officer Brandon. His testimony was short, but indicative of the state's case. He testified that Wendy drove down Trescott. Again, she explained why. But more importantly, the state tried repeatedly to pound this evidence in to show that Catherine Magbanawa made a phone call, got a phone call at 12:30 and said, I know it's already been done. Remember that testimony? And the state was desperate to say that that phone call somehow came from Wendy Adelson. But look at their own exhibit. The phone call is at 12:30. They showed it to you today. Look where Wendy Adelson is at 12:30. She's nowhere near the residence. According to the state's theory, she must have mind-reading ability. But yet they continue to try to pound that puzzle piece into place. They double down on it. Ask yourself why. Jeffrey Lacoste. The jury instructions will tell you to evaluate bias in witnesses in determining their truthfulness. It is not up for dispute that Mr. Lacoste was a jilted lover who was stalking Wendy Adelson. You heard that from Hale, Officer Hale, the later witness. More importantly, though, Jeffrey Lacoste thought that the Adelsons and Wendy had tried to frame him. He was upset about that. They thought he tried to frame them. He thought they tried to frame him for this murder. And so his testimony was shaped by that anger. The truth is, he had a nice time at dinner with Charlie on March 11th at Yardbirds. There's a text message in real time, unsolicited, confirming that. Charlie didn't send him a text, he sent Charlie a text. The truth is, when he talks about Charlie having associations with the Cuban element, whatever he testified to, by the way, no one in this case is Cuban. Tell you a secret, Sigfredo Garcia is not Cuban. Luis Rivera is not Cuban. Made up. He admitted that even though he supposedly thought Wendy was part of a murder, he would have gotten back together with her. Does that make any sense? He says that Wendy told him that Charlie really looked into hiring a hitman. He says she told him this when they were breaking up. Does that make any sense? He says that after they broke up, she told him it was a celebration dinner, meaning she's telling him, I did a murder with Charlie. Does that make any sense? And then you hear about these notes. You hear it from Officer Hale and others, how there's a bunch of notes. He took a bunch of notes. I never saw the notes. You know why? He destroyed them. Ask yourself why. His testimony makes no sense, is biased, and should be discounted as nonsense. As someone who is angry because he thinks they tried to frame him. Stephen Webster. Honest. Nice. This was Professor Markel's divorce lawyer. But notice something. He's not a divorce lawyer. He's a criminal lawyer. Never litigated anything in the case. But yet they call him to try to bolster some sort of motive that Wendy Adelson was so fearful and the family was so fearful that she was going to be disbarred, that these motions were going to be successful. When I asked him, did you know that the judge was frustrated with Professor Markel? He had no idea because he wasn't the lawyer at the time. Junum Chinda. She testified that Charlie sleeps with a gun. Why would he sleep with a gun if he was part of the murder? She testified that during the bump, she wasn't actually clear, but I'll give him this. During the bump and after that, he was upset. He was acting weird. Of course he was. He didn't know whether his family was about to get killed. He didn't know who was extorting them the second time. She also testified how Charlie flew out of the country and always returned. Ryan Fitzpatrick. To me, this witness sums up the state's case. And it's scary. He had no firsthand knowledge of anything. And you learn only through cross-examination that years after the murder, when he was about to be sued by Charlie, he threatened him to go to the FBI and say things bad about him. You learn that just days before coming in this courtroom, he's on a blog taking bets about whether he can cause him to serve the rest of his life in prison. Disgusting. Luis Rivera. The state still doesn't get it. I'm not going to discredit his testimony, just the opposite. To me, Luis Rivera's testimony was in some ways the most significant. He's an animal, but he was truthful. He said what he knew. It proved firsthand why you must find Charlie Adelson not guilty of all 3 counts. It proved firsthand reasonable doubt. It was an aha moment. Let me remind you of it. He admitted that Katie was the mastermind of the killing. He said that everything had to be cleared through Katie. He said that everything he and Sigfredo knew came through Katie. He said he wanted to do a robbery, but Katie said he couldn't do a robbery, that it had to be done this way. We went through all the lies that Katie told him through Sigfredo, the lady being on Trescott, the purpose of the trips, the amount of money. He now understood why he got $37,000 instead of $35,000. We went through the fact that he knew nothing about the payments over time or the gifts to Katie. And here was the punchline. When asked, could this have been an extortion and not a murder for hire? Could they have lied about that to you too? His answer was yes. One of the two shooters admitted to you that knowing what he knows now, this could have been an extortion. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of reasonable doubt. Am I going to discredit him? No. I'd never talked to him before. The first time I met him was in this courtroom. Their witness says it could have been an extortion. Catherine McVanawa. Now, we've talked a lot about her already, and I don't want to talk about her much more. But ask yourself about all her lies. This Halloween nonsense. Go take a look at Defense Exhibit 34. Charlie Adelson knew nothing about Sigfredo Garcia on Halloween. You see it in text message on November 27th. They'll try to spin the text message. Read it for yourselves. Defense Exhibit 34. Her testimony alone should give you a mountain of reasonable doubt. Clarissa Libiedo and Erica Johnson. The state called them to prove something we already admitted in opening. Katie didn't work at the Adelson Institute. Mary Hall, truthful witness. She confirmed that Katie got paid overtime. She couldn't give you exact numbers, but when you look at the numbers, you see it corresponds to around $3,000 a month. She confirmed that the Adelson checks created a paper trail, something that Charlie had no issue with because he was not part of a murder. She confirmed the gifts, the payments for the car repairs. By the way, she confirmed that he put many of those on his credit card, creating a paper trail as well. Now let's talk about those gifts, because I want to make sure everyone understands it. Over time, Charlie became more and more convinced that Katie was not part of the extortion. But he needed her help. See, because as long as she was helping him, he knew he wasn't going to be paid a visit. As long as she was helping him, he knew the money wouldn't go up. And so he tried to keep her happy. Now, they want you to believe he tried to keep her happy because he was worried that she would go to the police and report a murder that they both did together. Does that make any sense? No, he tried to keep her happy because he wanted her to know he was appreciative that she was helping him. Investigator Corbett, a thorough witness, straightforward guy, honest. This is the phone analyst investigator. He looks at patterns. He doesn't know what's said on the phone. It's guesswork. He sees the frequency in the amount of calls. And he looks for patterns. Now, when asked, could these calls be because it's a boyfriend and a girlfriend, a mother and a son, husband and a wife? He says, of course. He also confirmed that there's an absence in records. That by the time they arrest Charlie Adelson in 2022, we can no longer get phone records before when they got him originally. We can no longer get SunPass records. SunPass records would show that Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson, Donna Adelson and Harvey Adelson never were at Charlie Adelson's house that night. He confirms that. And he also confirmed that there were a lot of calls that are consistent with when Charlie is driving to work and coming home from work. Now, I want to talk about this landline issue because it is crazy. It may be the craziest thing in this case. And it's done to incite you. But when you think about it, you're going to see it means absolutely nothing. So they have a chart. She showed it in closing of frequency in using the landline, calling the landline. And you see that Charlie hardly ever calls his parents' landline. Okay? And they want to show you that on a particular day or days, he calls the landline. So that must mean something. What does it mean? He's using his cell phone. He's calling his parents' number that has been the same number since the year he was born. Grasping at straws. That's what that is. Then they confuse a wired call with those calls. What they're confusing is there's a call after Charlie. You'll see it go look at it. There's a call after Charlie learns about the text message that they sent to his mom at like 2 a.m. You'll recall that he and his parents meet at the pool at their apartment. And you'll recall that Charlie then goes and he goes to a friend's office and he gets a call or calls Katie. And then he says, I'll call you from a landline. And that's because he doesn't get good service in that office. It has nothing to do with his parents' apartment. This landline, it doesn't mean anything. It's like magic. It's like they're putting on a magic show. Use your common sense. Corbett also confirmed that Charlie's house was a stone's throw away from the turnpike and that the most direct route to Tallahassee for Donna and Harvey was to take the turnpike, which passes right outside his house. And he confirmed that Charlie didn't leave his house for more than 24 hours after the night he was extorted. They show you that Jim text. Corbett, their own witness, confirms he didn't leave the house. We're almost there. Special Agent Jimenez. No real substance. He pretends to be a Latin King gang member. Simply. When he does the bump of Donna Adelson. It's going to be critical that you hear that and understand that. He pretends to be a brother of Tato. And he testified up here that the reason why he did that is because he wanted the Adelsons to know that it was gang related. Up until this point in time, we're now in 2016, April 19th. There's nothing about Latin Kings. No matter how many times Ms. Kappelman wants to ask Charlie about Latin Kings in 2014 or talk to you about Latin Kings in 2014, they're nowhere near this case in Charlie's mind until 2016. And more precisely, until April 20th of 2016. And we'll get there in a moment. But Jimenez testifies that he inserts this into the bump. Then we heard from Agent Bronstein and Keith McElvey. And we learned from them that only part of Dolce Vita is recorded. You saw it's difficult to hear. You can't hear almost anything Catherine McBandle is saying. And we learned that there's numerous recordings. By the way, you have two of the recordings. I submit to you that the recordings are the exact same. You can listen to them for yourselves. But it's interesting where they started the recording that they played for you. And we know what he meant when he said that because he never fled. You heard from Special Agent Sanford. He went to places far away. Extradition's tough. And he always came back. Investigator Kendall Matsuri. Probably my favorite question in the case that you didn't understand until later when I asked him whether he didn't like sushi. That's how they knew he was police. But he testified that when he arrested Charlie in 2022, there was barbed wire and cameras all over his house. Ask yourself why. He confirmed that that arrest was 6 years after the arrest of Sigfredo and Kate. Ask yourself why. Now they put on evidence through Special Agent Sanford a second time. And they were called, they called him to put in all the wires. But he couldn't really talk about what the wires meant because he wasn't part of those conversations. Only two people could really talk about what they were meant. And frankly, I thought maybe we'd have a he said, she said case in this case. They didn't call Catherine McBandle. You only have one version, the truth of what was said on those wires. And we'll get to that. Sanford the second time confirmed that Katie was hiding when the police came knocking on her door. She lied to you about that. He confirmed that Katie lied during her proffers, that he had to walk out. She lied to you about that. He confirmed that there was no evidence of any calls between Katie and Charlie after Sigfredo's arrest in the spring of 2016. He testified to the numerous lies that Katie told on the wires to Charlie and how she didn't lie to her co-conspirator, Sigfredo. That was their case in chief. We had no obligation to put on a case. When you're evaluating the presumption of innocence and whether they met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt, stop right there. They didn't come close. But we put on a case. We talked a little bit about lawyer Adelson. We can move on from her. I think you get the point of what her purpose was. But Charlie Adelson testified. And when he testified, you saw him explain on direct what happened on the 18th. How he was extorted, how he was fearful for himself and his family. You heard why he didn't go to the police. Now, listen, some of us might go to the police, some of us might not. You heard why he didn't go to the police. Reasonable. He had just seen what had happened to Professor Markel. He knew the danger of these people. And she wants you to think that he would negotiate with Katie that night. He was stunned. What was there to negotiate? And again, there's no counter narrative because they didn't call Katie McBanawa and ask her about it.
We're back to this. We're back to they didn't present rebuttal witnesses, so that's a sign of innocence.
You heard why he thought Katie wasn't part of it and was protecting them. And you may remember Miss Kappelman trying to trick him. And he was clear. In 2014, he had no idea she was behind it. No matter how many ways she tried to ask the question. You saw him explain all the wires. I'm not going to do it here. I won't do that to you all. You saw him explain every word on Dolce Vita. You saw him explain what Dolce Vita was about. See, what you learn is that he met with his mom. And at first he thought this might be the same original extorter because he knew that Catherine and Sigfredo were having issues. And that made him nervous. But he also saw how different this was. And I apologize. I went over so many wires where it's the same thing over and over and over as to him trying to compare the two events. I did it for a reason. It wasn't to bore you. It was to show you in real time what was on his mind. When he met with his mom, because of the differences, he was pretty certain it was the police. And he had no clue who Tato was. But then he meets with Catherine McBanawa in that car, and he freaked out. And you know why he freaked out? Because he learns that there is a Tato. He learns that he is not only in the Latin Kings, but is the head of the Latin Kings. He learns that he has brothers. Remember the bump? My brother is incarcerated, and he learns that Tato is incarcerated. And he thinks to himself, oh my God. And by the way, he also learns, which we now know is a lie, because again, Katie was trying to protect Sigfredo. He learns that Tato was the killer. He wasn't the killer. Sigfredo was the killer, Tutto. But in the car, he learns about the Latin Kings, he learns about Tato, and he learns that that is the guy that she told him killed Professor Markel. And you wonder why he's talking the way he's talking at Dolce Vita. He is freaking out. He thinks his mom, if they don't pay, is going to get killed. And if she doesn't get killed, someone else is. And so when they walk into Dolce Vita, that's what the debate is about. So you have to understand the context of the conversation. When they're talking about rental cars, it's because he's just learned about the rental car. When they're talking about dead gang members, it's because he's just learned about a gang member, Kato. And the debate is he wants her to pay. And she's telling them, it's not them. It's not him. And the reason why she's telling him it's not him is because she knows who Tato is. You saw Tato. He'd be a little bit more threatening than the guy we saw in the video. And his associates would be a little bit more threatening than Mr. Jimenez. And through Dolce Vita, what you see is a couple things. And you can listen to it. Don't take my word for it. You see him trying to act tough. But then you see him quickly say, but I don't know anything. I'll keep my mouth shut. So he's acting tough. I'm carrying a gun. I'll shoot the gang member in my driveway, but I don't know anything. I'm keeping my end of the bargain from July 18th. I'm not going to say a word. This discussion about information and details. It's clear on Dolce Vita and on the liars what they're talking about. The details aren't details about a murder. The details are details about the payments. By the way, that's what they talked about when Jimenez came and did the bump. We know you've been helping. The payments. They leave out the fact that repeatedly he says, I don't care if it's the police because I've got nothing to hide. It's said in Dolce Vita. Discussions about the importance of the characteristics of the guy who approached them. He's not using, he's using a real phone number. He's not wearing a disguise. He's not giving 48 hours. He's not being threatening. Again, we talked about it. They only know part of the story. Discussions about who he hopes it is. Hopes it's the police. And you see that contrary to what Ms. Kappelman said in closing, his absolute first instinct is to pay. He wants her to pay. She doesn't want to pay. See, she knows it's not Tato. She knows it's not Sigfrido. And she's trying to convince him it's the police. And you'll see in the video, she goes to the bathroom. And by the way, he's been talking like this. He doesn't stop. She goes to the bathroom and he finally listens. And when she comes back, you see his conversation changes again. He says, okay, I see what you say. Here's the number. Call the number. But he starts talking about how it's different. And then he calls his mom and he talks to his mom about how it's the police. And Matsuri is the same thing. Now, why they're talking in code, listen, I think this is semantics. There is no code, but we can agree on this. They are talking carefully. And the reason he is talking carefully depends on who he is speaking to. When he's speaking to Catherine Magdanua, he is speaking carefully because he needs her help. And he does not want to spook her. When his mom and him are speaking carefully, it's because he does not want anyone to know, including the police, about the first extortion. Because if they know about the first extortion, they're going to come talk to him, and he believes that he and his family will be in danger. And by the way, he doesn't go to the police because it's clear the police wouldn't believe him. Just like they don't believe him right now. Now, during Miss Kappelman's cross of Charlie Adelson, you saw it. I'm not going to go into it in detail. But one thing is clear, is that he knew the wires cold. He knew dates. He knew what he said on particular wires. And you might ask yourself, why? His life is dependent on those wires. For the last year and a half, he's been in prison, jail. He's reviewed those wires because he knows they show what really happened. The wires show his innocence. And they certainly don't show proof beyond a reasonable doubt of his guilt. You know, like the landline, I want you to think about the bullet bourbon. Agent Maltese was told to take a picture of that bullet bourbon. Done to incite. Thank God Wendy Adelson kept the invitation to the party. Not the simplest explanation, but the truth. The state's case is like that. The case against Charlie Adelson is a case of guesses and of assumptions. It was not brought until just weeks before Catherine McVanawa's second trial. 8 years after the murder, 6 years after the arrest of Sigfredo, and later Catherine McVanawa. The evidence wasn't there then, and it isn't there today to meet their high burden. The puzzle pieces do not fit. He did not participate in the murder of Professor Markell. He didn't do it. He didn't conspire to do it. He didn't solicit it. By the way, speculation can be reasonable doubt. You can go back there and figure out.
Objection, Your Honor, misstatement of the law.
Right.
I think he's going down a really, really bad road right here. And I think he should have ended it right when he said the state doesn't have anything because it's not a specific case. All they have is guesses. Skip this 8 years down the road thing. My client was arrested or charged late, so he's innocent. I mean, if that were the case, Robert Durst would never have gotten convicted. That was done decades later. There is no statute of limitations on murder. He knows that. And the state has every right to indict who they want whenever they want. I mean, this is just, they have the evidence. But they started with the shooters. They went to the middle woman, and now they're at Charlie Adelson. I just find this very frustrating and long, and it should have been kept short. And I'm very interested.
Concerning speculation, you may continue with your argument.
You're allowed to use your common sense. That's what you're allowed to do. That's what you're told to do. You don't have to check that in the door out there. The presumption of innocence means that we presume the best about people. We presume them to be blameless. That means when you're listening to these wires, if there are two possible explanations, you go with the one that is favorable to Charlie Adelson. That's what is consistent with the presumption of innocence. The state wants you to assume guilt. They want you to listen to these wires, and they want you to hear them in a certain way through dirty lenses. They want you to look at them through the lens of everything being wrong and sinister. That is not what the law says you should do. If you presume this man innocent, which the law says you must do, which is what each and every one of you gave your word you would do during jury selection, then you look at these wires and you listen to them assuming the best about Charlie Adelson. And when you have two explanations, both of them reasonable, you go with the one that presumes his innocence. That's how our system works. Reasonable doubt, the judge has instructed you on. And he's told you that reasonable doubt is if you vacillate, if you go back and forth, that either explanation could be right. If you waver at all, that is living, breathing proof of reasonable doubt. And when you find yourself doing that, you must find Charlie Adelson not guilty, because that is reasonable doubt and shows that the state did not meet its burden. Each and every one of you promised us during jury selection that you would have the courage, the fortitude, that if the prosecution didn't meet its burden, something they have not come close to doing in this case, that you would have the courage to say the words "not guilty." And that's what we're asking you to do, because simply put, the evidence isn't there. The evidence is actually consistent with innocence.
This is
Now,
ridiculous.
because of the
Just
state's
end it.
high burden of proof, they get another closing. And I don't get to speak again. So I need each and every one of you, when they're speaking, to think in your minds, what would Rashbaum say? What would the evidence say? Remember, in our system, they don't get the last word. You do. I know you will take your jobs as jurors seriously. I know you will follow the law, the presumption of innocence, and the high burden of proof. If you do that, there is only one just verdict in this case. Count 1, not guilty. Count 2, not guilty. Count 3, not guilty. End this nightmare. Send him home. Thank you, Your Honor.
State prepared to give its rebuttal closing.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
That was painful. Way too long and passionate, but didn't make a lot of sense. And apparently the jury, for those that were in the courtroom who watched, many smiled when he said this is almost over. And that was like an hour away from the closing. Okay. Bring it home, Georgia.
This is encouraged you to speculate in this case. The law does not allow that. I want to draw your attention to page 4 of your jury instructions. You don't have to pick them up. Page 4, middle of the page. Whenever the words reasonable doubt are used, you must consider the following. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt. Could it be? Not good enough. A speculative doubt, speculation. Don't have that in the courtroom. We don't have that in the jury deliberation room. Imaginary or forced doubt, not reasonable. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. When you're back there and you're thinking about what Mr. Rashbaum would have said, he would have said puzzle pieces. First puzzle piece, the motive doesn't fit because he had a great life and he wouldn't have wanted to ruin his life. The problem with that argument is arrogance. This was not an issue for him because he wasn't going to get caught, because he was untouchable. They said relocation had no impact on Charlie Adelson, and that they proved Wendy's innocence in their questioning of her. Why are they working so hard to convince you Wendy is innocent? Does it matter? Y'all aren't being asked to decide anything about Wendy Adelson. There's nothing on that verdict form about Wendy Adelson. Did she corroborate the defense theory in this case? Wendy Adelson testified she didn't know anything about this supposed extortion of her brother, even though she moved there the day this happened. She didn't know in 14, she didn't know in 15, and she didn't know until it was announced in opening statements in this courtroom. I asked her about it, and she said, quote, "Well, I learned that someone made that argument. I don't know whether it's true or not. I don't know whether it's true or not." Even his own sister doesn't believe this load he's trying to sell y'all. Garcia wanted to kill the defendant so he wouldn't have done a hit on his behalf. And for that, they refer to the jet ski incident. They couldn't be in a conspiracy together because they hated each other. Well, that was part of the purpose of the walling off. The whole theory of this defense is that this defendant was so fearful of Sigfredo Garcia that he couldn't do the normal thing. He couldn't report this. But he continued to date Catherine Magbanua, Garcia's baby mama, after all this. After July 1, when they had this incident in the roadway. After the extortion. And even after that, he continues to send love notes to Sigfredo Garcia's woman. Even after the two of them get back together, he's still sending those notes because he's so arrogant. Defense has told you that the defendant made the joke about the TV being cheaper than Hitman to people he hardly knew. Who are those people? The only person that testified in this courtroom that they had heard that joke was Wendy Adelson. Lacasse was asked. The lawyer said they said it, but you guys have to refer to your notes and your own memories about what the evidence showed. But Lacasse was asked, did he say the joke at the dinner that y'all went to with Wendy and Garcia and Catherine Magbanua? I'm sorry, Wendy and Charlie and Catherine Magbanua. And he says, no. He does not recall that joke being made, and he thinks he would have recalled it had it been made. So there is no evidence in this trial that the defendant told that joke to people he hardly knew. If this was a murder for hire, it should have been paid in advance. Murder for hires always get paid in advance. That's what Pat Sanford said. That's not what he said. What Pat Sanford said is the arrests have been made close in time after the other murder for hire cases have worked. So there's no payment over time, gifts and stuff like that. Here, the investigation took years for the defendant to have the opportunity to try to keep her happy, to try to provide these gifts. Not only to her, but to Sigfredo Garcia. A gift card for a vacation on your extortion victim. Offered, not asked for, not demanded, offered. Offered to the extortionist. The defense talked about Catherine Magbanua. He hates when people lie, and she's a liar, and she lied to you. Well, Mr. Rashbaum's opinion about the witnesses, he told you which ones were good, which ones were lying, which ones were truthful, which ones were the best ones, which ones meant nothing. You guys decide that stuff. Okay? What we say is not evidence. Catherine Magbanua is a liar, though. I mean, she said other stuff, and now she's saying this. You guys have to consider that. That's a no-brainer. She has played every card she had, and this is the last stop for her. I agree with that. You guys agreed at jury selection that you would keep an open mind to that type of evidence, and that's all I ask you to do. Does it fit with the other evidence in the case? Because her last testimony sure didn't. Nobody has stronger feelings about Catherine Magbanua than the ones sitting on this side. Would I ask you to base this defendant's freedom on the word of Catherine Magbanua? That's what they said I'm doing, and I would never do that. Never. Does it fit with the other evidence in the case? That's what I'm asking you to consider. I didn't ask her about Dolce Vita. She verified the transcript. She said the words that scrolled when y'all watched it were the words that were said. The state has a doubt. What if we do? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the lawyers think. Doesn't matter. Do you have a doubt? Doesn't matter what I think. Doesn't matter what Mr. Rashbaum thinks. Regarding the defendant's demeanor in 2014, the defense said there was nobody that said anything about his demeanor. We only asked about, was he going crazy after the bump? And the answer was yes. That's not true. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was his best friend in 2014, they didn't fall out until 2015, reported no change in his behavior. I said, was his behavior weird like that before the bump? No, not weird. That was his quote. He was normal until the bump, and then he was agitated, angry, freaked out, tense, stressed, whatever. Why didn't I play all of the calls? Did y'all get enough of the calls? It's trying to pick the parts that I think are important. They're in evidence. Feel free to listen to them. I do not want you to think I was trying to hide anything from you. Those are in evidence. And you will have an opportunity to review anything you want when you're back there with the recording equipment, headphones, and all that will be provided to you. The defense says in calls A, B, and C, if you did a murder with someone, wouldn't it be the first thing on your mind to report? Well, maybe, but you're probably not like Charlie is. You're probably not untouchable. Charlie Adelson asks the description on the wire, tell me about this guy, what's the timing, what was he wearing a disguise? How do those questions, the defense is offering that as evidence that he was trying to deduce whether this blackmailer was the same as the prior blackmailer, but he never saw the prior blackmailer. He only saw Catherine Magbanua. So how does asking if the guy that approached his mother was wearing a disguise tend to prove his innocence or tend to prove his extortion theory? The guy that extorted him wasn't wearing a floppy hat and an Abe Lincoln beard. It was Sigfredo Garcia. It was Catherine Magbanua. Sigfredo Garcia, the first extortionist, didn't give him 48 hours to pay. He put him on a payment plan. He paid over years. The defendant, hoping it's the police. and saying, quote, these people only know part of the story, or they think they know part of the story. The defense picks that out and says, oh, there he is talking about the first extortion. Or is he saying, why did they go to my mom instead of me? I'm the one that has a connection to you. I'm the one that, I think what he says is, I'm the one that has a relationship to you. Why didn't they come to the one that's involved? I mean, I'm not involved. That's what he says. Why didn't they come to the one that was involved in this? That's what he's trying to figure out about why they went to his mom and not him. Can't even read my own writing here. Oh, the PowerPoint with Wendy. Okay, the dots on the cell phone PowerPoints do not indicate where they're going to be somewhere around there. And the testimony was that Wendy's dot at 12:30 could be consistent. He can't say where she was. Could be consistent with her being at Trescott. And we know she went to Trescott because Officer Glynn observed her there. So I'm not desperately trying to pound a puzzle piece into y'all that Wendy made the call to say it's done. I don't know that. I can't prove that. If that information was conveyed, I don't know how it got conveyed. All right, Lacoste. They really need y'all to discount the testimony of Jeffrey Lacoste, right? Because of that statement that Wendy made to him just before the murder, that all kidding aside, her brother really had looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markell. And the defense says, you can't believe him, he's a jilted lover. And the evidence definitely showed that he was heartbroken over Wendy Adelson. But unfortunately for the defense, his brain was working just fine. And he testified about Charlie Adelson bragging in the hot tub about connections to a Cuban criminal element. The defense says, oh, they're not Cuban, that's not in evidence. They're of Hispanic descent, and he reported that to law enforcement, that that's what Charlie said. Lacoste doesn't know if they're Cuban or something else. Lacoste said he bragged in the hot tub about having connections to a Cuban criminal element, and when Lacoste reported that information, the killers had not been identified, so he had no way of knowing if they were Cuban or of Hispanic descent. That's the importance of that. Lacoste says Wendy reported the celebration dinner, same thing. He comes in and tells the cops, look, she reported a celebration dinner to me where she vomited on the table. An inspection of the records proves there was a dinner and she did vomit. But they want you to believe that Lacoste is just lying about the celebration part? The Halloween text. They've asked you to look at their piece of evidence that talks about when Garcia learned about the existence of Charlie. That doesn't shed any light on what we're saying occurred on Halloween. On Halloween, Charlie, this defendant, approached Catherine Magbanua about, do you know anyone that can rough him up? Okay, we're not alleging that she called Garcia that day and said, hey, can you come kill somebody? That was just the first inquiry into a plan that developed over time between Charles Adelson and Catherine Magbanua. All right, the defense mentioned Erica, and I'm almost done. Erica Johnson and her testimony, that didn't mean anything. Why did they call them? What about that recorded call between the defendant and Erica? Why does he tell her not to talk to the police? What about June Mchinda? Why does he tell her not to talk to the police? They don't know about the first layer of extortion. They can't reveal the first layer of extortion that will reveal the second layer of extortion that will expose him to the Latin Kings. Why is he telling them not to talk to the cops? Defendant's testimony. They say it's reasonable that he didn't go to the police with the truth because he had just seen what these people were capable of. They killed Dan Markell. He was in fear. Okay. Is that consistent with what you know about him? I refer you back to the wires and everything you know about him. But also, why then not come forward with this story when the bad guys were arrested and the danger was eliminated? Why not come forward when Catherine McVanoa was arrested and he believed her to be innocent? For 3 years, she awaited trial while this man thought she had nothing to do with it, according to him. Yet, he did not come forward with this story. Why not come forward after her conviction? All the bad guys have been arrested and convicted. Danger eliminated. Come tell the truth. He doesn't do it. What about after his own arrest? He doesn't come forward then. We learn it in this courtroom in opening statement. Defense says the defendant freaked out in the car before Dolce Vita. Right? You have to watch Dolce again and see if you think he was freaking out or if he was in control of that situation. He was the one giving orders in that situation. I'll go back to the players in this case being smart. I mean, the defendant is smart. And they had over a year to carefully plan this murder with the goal of not getting caught. And he's had 7 years to think about his defense in this case since the case first broke. And he does think he's untouchable. Don't guess. Don't assume. Look at the evidence. It will tell you everything you need to know. But don't let the way the defendant thought he would get away with this be the reason he gets away with it. As long as you keep your mouth shut, you can get away with murder. Well, fortunately for us, the defendant didn't take his own advice. He did take the witness stand. He did offer statements, and you are able to assess his credibility as part of your determination of this case. Only one of us is putting on a magic show. It's up to y'all to figure out which one it is, right? We just hope and trust that you all have the common sense and the courage to see this case for what it is, to cut through all the stuff that the lawyers say and get to the meat of it and render a verdict that does justice for Dan Markell. And that is a verdict of guilty as charged. Thank you.
In just a
Finally.
few minutes, you will be taken to the jury room by the bailiff. The first thing you should do is to choose a foreperson who will preside over your deliberations. The foreperson should see to it that your discussions are carried on in an organized way and that everyone has a fair chance.
Okay, so finally we saw Georgia Kappelman, the assistant state prosecutor, bring up the point that I wanted her to make, which was, I can get away with this murder. It's easy to get away with a murder. Whatever he was caught on the wires, Charles Adelson, the defendant, saying something close to that. Who are they going to believe, me or these other low-life defendants? I'm a dentist. So she brought that finally in rebuttal. I would have leaned heavily on that if I were the prosecutor. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so it's easy to Monday morning quarterback. But I thought she did a really good job. She didn't go on too long. I thought the defense went on way too long. Here they are charging the jury right now. But thank you for everyone who watched this with me from the beginning to the end. Thank you so much. Now it goes to the jury. I'm not hopeful for a not guilty verdict. I think that's the least likely in this case. I think it's between a hung jury and a guilty verdict at this point. And I think Charles Adelson knows it by his look. He looked like he was going to throw up through most of it. Very pale, not confident, his eyes scanning the jury. We'll see how it goes. It's a fool's game predicting a jury. But I'll see you back here at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. Got a ideologically aligned with the Innocence Project lawyer getting PTFO'd at her Judiciary Hearing Committee meeting. She is nominated to be a judge in Connecticut. Stay tuned for that at 6. I'll see you back here. Have a great day, everybody.